was televised. Hi. Hi. Good morning. Thank you, Patrick, for inviting me. Thank you, Church of the Oaks, for welcoming me. And happy almost Thanksgiving to everyone. I can't think of a better time to give this talk than in the spirit of giving thanks. We're going to talk about grief. So I often start talks by saying that some people like remodeling their kitchen. Some people get excited about planning a trip to Hawaii. I mean, I'd get excited about that too, but anyway, I get excited about talking about grief. But it wasn't always that way. Grief had to change me first. And here is how that story happened. In 2008, I watched my friend Joe, a hilarious human, a chef, a writer, a martini-drinking, Uber father of two, get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and be dead within the year. I spent a lot of time with his wife and his two young kids in those last days, and I often left their house crying for what was happening to their young family, but secretly also feeling very relieved that it wasn't happening to mine. His death rattled our group of friends, and so in his honor, I scheduled an overdue mammogram appointment, and you can imagine my disbelief when a doctor found a suspicious lump, and the irony and the terror when I too had cancer. So as I had a strong family history of breast cancer and I had two small children myself at the time, I opted for a radical double mastectomy with reconstructive surgery. So I just launched into get it done mode. The surgery was successful and the reconstruction was set to be textbook, but when my pathology came back after surgery, they had found another tumor previously undetected. And this one was larger, this one was scarier, and this one was invasive. So that is when the needle on the record scratched for me. This was not going to be over quickly. I would now officially need an oncologist and further treatment. So over time and with more surgery and that treatment, I eventually did get the all clear. I was one of the lucky ones. I survived. I had a future to look forward to again. So why, a year later, did I sink into the biggest depression of my life, so much so that I considered taking my own life? Well, we can all take turns analyzing why the depression took hold when I received a clean bill of health. Through my diagnosis and surgeries, I had the support of family and friends, and with that support came well-meaning comments like, "So lucky you beat this. You're a fighter." Or, "You're so young, it's good that you had the option for reconstruction." Or my favorite, "You should be so grateful you caught it early because you know when Aunt Sally found hers, uh-oh." So all those were, in fact, true. I was grateful. I did catch it early. But with those innocent yet dismissive comments, it took away my chance to process what was coming up for me. First, I had lost a body part. Well, I mean, two, to be exact, but I mean, we're not counting that. I actually was getting an opportunity to stare in the face my mortality a good 30 years before I was ready to do so. And I was getting a fast education in how society is programmed to support grief. Sending cards and condolences, and if you're from the Midwest like me, a nice tater tot casserole, all of which are thoughtful and lovely gestures, no question, but often they don't scratch the surface of how we can support someone's grief. I felt an urgency to find the silver lining quickly, and I felt encouraged to almost instantaneously feel no other emotion but gratitude. I was skipping over what was churning inside of me. I was spending a lot of time imagining dying young and afraid to mention it for fear that someone might say, "Yeah, but you didn't." I was envisioning how my parents, who depend on me, would handle me dying on them. And the biggest whopper, I'd find myself folding little toddler socks, fresh from the dryer, picturing my children motherless. So, after all, Joe's family was proof that it could happen to any of us. So this fragile new state of mind that I was in, that I had yet to define as grief, left me disconnected and lost to myself. Was I supposed to be celebrating life, or was I supposed to be waiting for the other shoe to drop? Or was I just being dramatic? Because, I've never been accused of that. It felt important to those around me that I go back to normal, and that I started believing myself that maybe I should too. After all, who gets depressed after surviving cancer? Well, what I wished I had known then was that there are so many ways that we can experience grief, and non-death losses like I was experiencing. This particular experience of mine fell into a category called disenfranchised grief, which is defined simply as a grief that is judged. What intrigued me about this is now I finally had a name for this complexity of thoughts and feelings that I was having. What intrigued me further is how much I was disenfranchising myself with judgmental thoughts like, who gets depressed after surviving cancer? Or how I would compare my suffering to others, right? The classic short sell, like, I don't have any right to bring up how I'm feeling. Her mother actually did die. Other examples of disenfranchised grief are grief around estrangement from family. And with Thanksgiving coming up, that may be very applicable to some. Grief around the incarceration of a loved one. Grief around long-term health issues. Grief around the death of a former spouse. Grief around retirement. The list is long. There are many other kinds of grief, like anticipatory grief, which is the grief we feel around an impending loss, like an impending divorce, or caring for someone with dementia. In anticipatory grief, you are both holding on and letting go at the same time. And sadly, experiencing it prior to death does not mean you don't after. You're just lucky you get to do it twice. There's also delayed grief, when the trauma of an event hijacks your normal grief responses. An example might be a woman who's lost her husband and has small children at home. And in attending to their grief needs and daily routines, she delays her own grief response. And sometimes that can go on for years. These types of grief do not have their own section at the Hallmark store. They are as varied as our grief itself, and the way we experience them is as unique to us as our fingerprints. So after my experience, I set my course in providing support for others through grief coaching, grief education talks, and writing. And I often tell others that might be gun-shy about looking at their own pain or find it really uncomfortable to sit with others in theirs, that there is a richness to life that can only be found after that kind of examination. That the answers we seek in finding lasting happiness are not in the job promotions or the things we acquire, but in that kind of deep dive exploration of our sorrows. Because the funny thing happens when we look at our grief. Life takes on a sort of hyper-focus. What really matters to us gets our attention, and what is superficial or energy draining or redundant or out of our control just becomes managed or dismissed or ignored. And as it happened to me, rather than swallow hard and just be grateful, I started saying what was really happening. And I chose to be with people who could also confront their mortality and talk about the what ifs and maybe scare ourselves a little bit. And it felt freeing after a while to imagine chasing my dreams while also chasing toddlers, because nothing at that point was scarier than the idea of leaving my kids motherless. Grief is not the same for everyone, certainly, and you're not required to justify it, or explain it, or even get over it according to someone else's timeline. My friends and family were absolutely well-meaning, but because of grief's unpredictable nature, it is tricky for some to just be around, and that's okay. But I think that there is value in getting out your grief resume and seeing what's stacked up? Yeah, of course I do. It is my belief that by identifying that grief that might have gone unattended to, it allows us, or rather maybe gives us permission to go through the natural grief stages like anger and denial, depression, bargaining and acceptance with our non-traditional stories. So, grief is everywhere. It's in this room. It's out those doors. And there is grief in all of life's traumas and transitions. And that will never be any different. So I have learned for myself that making friends with my grief is the only way through it. So, on the topic of getting through it, I want to spend a few moments talking about the importance of ritual after loss. Consider how, as a culture, we have ritual around so many things, marriage and weddings. I mean, there's certain dresses and words and jewelry. There's ritual around graduations, kindergarten, 8th, high school, college. And certainly there's ritual around funerals. And there is real science that ritual can be very healing in our time of grief. And repeating traditions, or starting a new one, or creating ceremony around loss can be very cathartic. So I want to tell you a story that I heard somewhere along the way about the value of ritual. The story is about a son who always wanted more from his relationship with his dad. The dad was a hard-charging business type, never home, always at an emotional distance. And the son longed for a deeper connection. And on weekends, the son would watch his dad pull his car out of the garage and wash it, clean it inside and out, spend hours getting ready for another busy work week. And without anything ever being any different, one day, his dad died. Now, the son grieved for years that connection he never had. And finally, from a place deep within his grief, he decided it wasn't too late to feel close to his dad. So he began pulling his car out of the driveway on Sundays and washing it, just like his dad. And he spent time caring about what his dad did. And as simple as that was, felt profound. He created a connection to him through ritual. Now, that story does not end with the son finally feeling like he got what he wanted, not in the least. But what he did do, rather, was create a place to go and a thing to do when he missed the man he wished he had a deeper connection with. So, if you are currently grieving or curious about the ways we grieve or about creating ritual after loss, you can contact me. I will happily sit with you in yours, and I will think you are brave for looking at it. And heck, I'll even make you a tater tot casserole. I'm going to stay after for a little bit. Maybe we can share a donut or two, or a potato salad. I heard somebody brought a great potato salad. And answer some questions and spitball this important topic. Thank you for having me. I hope this was a benefit. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well,